My name is Klatt. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was raised in a home that valued words. Language was always at the center of our conversations. My mom was an English teacher. My dad was an American history teacher, high school teacher, and we often debated controversial issues at the dinner table, and a lot of our back and forth was over actual meanings of words, because that's what conversations ultimately come down to, right? These little units called words, and because language is so ambiguous, multi-layered, many denotations, language accumulates meaning, right, over centuries sometimes. We all have sort of different entry points into those words, and those words are used by different communities. So in our little, small, parochial way, I think often we would have different takes on words, and I love those debates. I was fascinated by the dictionary, especially when we would dig into etymologies of words and figure out the origins, and even pronunciations. I think we had arguments over. My mom was a Southerner from Kentucky, and so she said things like Florida and oranges. And my dad was a Midwesterner from Iowa, and he said Florida and oranges. And so that always often, incited much debate and hilarity. And we had a lot of fun around the table. So for me, I think just how much my family valued words. The word vocational discipleship, or the phrase vocational discipleship. Well, I'm a Christian, so that's my faith. So I believe that God gives every human being a calling, and that calling is written into who they are, into their the way they were created, their unique biology, their unique personalities. And so they were made to do something, and that thing that we were made to do, when we're allowed to do it, is something that brings us great life. So for me, that's been working with words. It's been being a teacher. So my vocation, I think, has a lot to do with being a caretaker of words. That's one of the roles of being a poet, is to take language seriously and to steward it, to play with it, to bend it, to explore its properties. I think kids have it right that language is fun. And they don't seem to be so worried about being correct. So that's not what I'm talking about. But I am interested in the consensus that we all have about what words mean. So, and the ways in which we maybe play with that consensus and push it. So vocation and discipleship have to do with being faithful with words. That's what I see. And words can be a blessing and they can be a curse. And there's a time and season for everything. There's a time for blessing, and there may be a time in which strong language is appropriate. But I think sometimes we're reckless in the wrong ways with words. And I think we tear people down, and we insult and corrupt. Sometimes we use words in sort of monolithic ways, where we see language as commercial and only commercial. Certainly we could use words in advertisements, but if language is only about commerce, it seems kind of destructive to me. It doesn't allow for the full dimension of what language can be. Sometimes language is very disinterested. It doesn't want to be co-opted by agendas, whether from the government or from individuals. And I think, language has often been used as a control device. And so, to me, those are all sort of corruptions of what I'm talking about, which is trying to be faithful with language and to cultivate it and to bring out its potential, its full potential, to allow it to be generative. I really think language should be generative. It should bring life. It should bring growth. It should bring pleasure. I think this is something Wallace Stevens understood very deeply, that language is about pleasure. And so when we get caught up with a utilitarian view of words, that words are meant simply to as transactional. That's true. They can be transactional, but there's so much more than that. And it seems to be that the vocation of poetry is about bringing out words in all their dimensions. Poetry is where language struts its stuff, okay, and shows off and shows what it can do. And I think usually when that's done right, people are delighted by that. Sometimes they're kind of shocked by that too, but I think they're delighted. Well, my path to Grand Rapids was a circuitous one. I was a English major in college. I loved words, but I was also just beginning to take my faith seriously, and I was trying to figure out how I could be faithful as a Christian, but also do this thing that I loved, which was play with words, find the beauty in language, craft images. I can remember writing a short story on a real old computer, I mean really old, and it had like green type, and the kind of stuff that you see in maybe like a movie with Matthew Broderick when he was a kid called War Games, and in this wonderful font. But I can remember typing and working on a short story, and it was in a word processor, and I remember how mesmerized I was by the process, and I thought I could do this the rest of my life. But I didn't really have a theology in place that really allowed for me to do that. I thought I needed to be, a pastor or a minister, something like that. So I went the route of seminary and did that, and that really helped sort of get my mind on straight. And then I was in campus ministry for a while, and the whole time I was also writing poems. And I was really encouraged when I was working in Pittsburgh by the Pittsburgh Poetry Exchange. And this was a loose organization in the city, people with different abilities with poetry, some accomplished poets who were publishing, others novices like myself. And we'd come together and we'd take turns in which our work was workshopped. And it was a powerful experience for me to be brought into that community. And from that group spawned some reading groups, because some of us just couldn't get enough in the monthly meetings. And so that sort of plunged me into sort of reading poets that I knew about, and in my English major maybe had read a little bit about, but really reading whole books of poems. People like Cavafy, Yeats, someone I certainly should have read as an English major, and I may have read one poem by him. But Emily Dickinson, I think it was just great to be sort of immersed in people who knew what they were doing and had committed their lives to poetry. So that was a great experience. And then I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I eventually went to St. John's in Annapolis, Maryland, for a Master's of Arts in Liberal Arts. And that's kind of a great books, classics program. And I thought if I go there, I can get, in touch with the reservoir of ideas and metaphors. And that turned out to be a really powerful experience. Wrote a lot of essays there and really was perfecting my writing. I started sending poems out for publication. I got my first acceptance at a real journal, the Cape Rock Review in Missouri. And then applied for MFA and PhD programs and got into the University of Georgia in their PhD program. And that's where things really took off for me, because there I think in a graduate program you often get the opportunity to network with people who are doing the work professionally, who show you the ropes of the vocation and expose you to so much that's out there. And I had such a little narrow world about what poetry was. And things had changed. I mean, when I was in college in the 80s, compared to the late 90s, early aughts when I was in my PhD program, the whole landscape of poetry had changed some. My college didn't really acknowledge the whole language movement of poetry. And that's something that ended up being very influential on me when I was in graduate school. So from there, I had to find a job. And I'll say before I went to my PhD, before I even went to St. John's, I went to the Festival of Faith and Writing at Calvin College at the time, 1996. And Robert Bly was one of the poets. Lee Young Lee was also a poet who read there. And I was blown away by these, again, professionals, people who, they were just so immersed in the work and believed in it and were showing me that you could do this full time if you're good enough and if you're committed enough. And so for me, that was really inspiring. But anyway, so I knew of Calvin. And then when I went to look for jobs, that was one of the places I looked, and I got hired there. And so once I got hired there, moved to Grand Rapids, and so I'm suddenly plunged into Michigan, which I knew from my childhood. Even though I grew up in Cincinnati, I spent summers on Lake Michigan and Stony Lake, and on the sand dunes between those two lakes. And there's a little creek called Stony Creek that flows from Stony Lake into Lake Michigan. And it's such a unique piece of geography. The birch forests there, obviously the dunes and the bulls and the woods, and just being in cabins and out, really mostly outside, camping on the beach, hiking in the Manistee Forest, and eventually taking a bike trip all the way up into Sault Ste. Marie, Canada. That was such a powerful experience. I had such a great experience with Michigan that I was really happy to be coming to a place like Grand Rapids. And I had one other thing about Grand Rapids that I was really excited about, and that was when I was a camper, I was on a bike trip, and it was supposed to be a 4-day bike trip and 200 miles. And so we went 100 miles to Grand Rapids, and we had, in those days, you didn't have a support van or anything like that. So we carried everything with us. Tires, pots and pans, sleeping bags, everything we carried. And we had a lot of breakdowns on our bikes, and we ended up my counselor ended up talking to the owner of Robinette's apple orchard. And he said, well, we can put you up in the barn for the night, because it was raining, it was cold, it was nasty, and we had 100 miles to go the next day. And I never forgot that piece of kindness, where he just let us stay in his barn, and we got access to his donuts and the cider. And believe me, when you're eating dehydrated food, that was just amazing. So I had nothing but fond memories of Grand Rapids and Michigan, and so coming here was just a real blessing. Well, I think the Presidential Exemplary Award for Teaching, first of all, there are a lot of folks at Calvin that deserve that honor that haven't received it. I was very fortunate to receive it. What it is it's an award for, I guess, being the most excellent teacher, or recognized as the most excellent teacher at Calvin for a given year. I think it was just put my head down and really focus on the work of poetry, and trying to allow my enthusiasm for poetry to be infectious, and to cultivate that love for poetry with students. And I think what really made the difference was when I was able to figure out how to talk about poetry with people who were not versed in poems. Engineers and chemists and biology folks and business people. And when I began to figure out just how to make it relatable and how to make it accessible for those folks. And when I realized, poets aren't just speaking in a vacuum, which I think for a while that's kind of what I thought. We were doing it for ourselves and our love for it, and we were just this group of monastic, hermetic people, right? Which I think is nothing farther from the truth. So. Language is this wonderful connector. Whitman understood that, and so I had to figure out how this thing I love and the thing I'm passionate about and the thing I have a specialty in, how to make that connect with the average student. I think once that happened for me, I think things began to take off. And also, the students I had really made the difference. I mean, they were the ones who, caught fire and decided that they really loved this stuff. And I think being poet laureate was part of it too. I mean, the fact that I had a position in the city that was recognized, and that I was an ambassador for poetry, not just in the school, but in the city, and then also as well as some national events that I was a part of. I think that contributed to my receiving that award. The poet laureateship was a surprise that I got it, and I was intimidated by the responsibility. And also intimidated by the fact that I didn't know Grand Rapids real well. I had been holed up in my office, which most of my colleagues will tell you is a cave. There are no windows, and I go into work pretty early, so before the light, the sunlight comes in. So, and that's where I'd be, sort of like Plato in his cave and the allegory of the cave. I mean, I'm just, not very illuminated, but still cool stuff happened in that little cave. But all to say, I was not as interactive in the community as I would have liked. So to be the ambassador for poetry in this region, I really needed to connect with people I already knew, And so I did reach out to people that I knew at different campuses, at Grand Valley, at Hope, even at Western Michigan, etc. And just ask them, what kinds of things do you think Grand Rapids needs right now? And I put together a small committee of people that first year, and we met, I don't know, once a month, once every 3 weeks, to talk about projects and to kind of just brainstorm. I felt like I really needed some collaboration, and I felt like these things wouldn't work unless there was a partnership. The library, Grand Rapids Public Library, was a natural partnership. And Tim Geisner at the time was the one who was the liaison for the library to the Poet Laureateship, and he was great. He was willing to work with me, and he was enthusiastic. So the first project that we came up with was to do book groups, and I would work with my team, and we would come up with 4 books, and those books we would write a little discussion guide for, and then I wrote a general rules of thumb for reading poetry, because it felt like in some ways poetry, especially in the university, had become a little inaccessible, and really wanted to bridge that gap. And it seemed to me that most book groups, and there are a lot of book groups in Grand Rapids, they don't read books of poems. And so I thought, well, here's a natural, sort of group of people who care about words. Let's try to get them to read some books of poems. So we picked some hot books that were out, and we picked some local books, and we tried that, and it worked okay. I wouldn't say it was our most successful project, but I do think it really got the wheels spinning for me. And then the next project I was really interested in was working with kids, especially young kids. So I thought elementary age, middle school age would be really fun. And so then was the question, well, how are you going to get them engaged, and what kind of project, and what will be the outcome, right? So I thought, well, we have to think small. We can't be too grandiose here. So I thought, in a couple sessions with a group of kids, we could probably get them to write haikus, right? So then we thought, well, let's start with something that's really tangible. So Tim had told me about some archives that the library had of photos, all kinds of cool photos, and it just struck me that these photos, the old photos of transportation in Grand Rapids, would be really cool for kids to kind of reckon with. Pictures of outdated modes of transportation, streetcars, right? Snowmobiles that don't look like snowmobiles, etc., and old cars, trains, etc. So this was great. We went into some after-school programs, and I led workshops, and kids came up with haiku, and then we selected the best of those, and then we thought about how we could exhibit it, and I reached out to the Grand Rapids bus system, and got talking with them, and then we came up with the idea of printing some of these haiku, these kids' haiku, onto placards that also had the photo of the transportation vehicle that they interacted with, and then they graciously donated that ad space, and so those were slapped on buses all around Grand Rapids, and I think they were there for over a year, and it was an idea to try to help kids to connect with the local transportation and to get them to ride the bus, you know. We did a great event down at the bus station downtown, and the kids and their parents and some of their teachers came, and it was a great celebration. And so that was a lot of fun, and it felt good. It felt like we were connecting a lot of different groups of people. And this next generation was getting more aware of the history of Grand Rapids and more maybe conscious of what it means to be responsible in terms of vehicles and protecting the environment. So that was a very fun project. The third project was something called Motion Poems. I had connection with the guy who runs this outfit in film company, basically in Minneapolis. He's a poet. His name's Todd Boss. And he does these short animated films, mostly animated, some are stop motion, films of poems, and ones in which he really wants to respect the poems. And I thought it would be really fun and interesting to bring that to Grand Rapids, just to show that poetry is taking a lot of different forms. And this is a kind of hybrid form. You're bringing the world of film and the artist who put together the film with the world of poetry and the poet who put that poem together. And you're merging them, and you're asking yourselves what's gained by that merge, and maybe what's lost by that merging. So we did it down in on Wealthy Street, the Wealthy Street Theater, and then we had a panel discussion afterwards with some local poets, filmmakers, and film critics. And so we had a conversation about this, and so that was the third project. And again, it was a lot of fun for me. It emphasized, it reinforced this idea that poetry isn't just an oral performance. It's not just something we read silently to ourselves, but it's also this typographical event on the page, that it actually has a visual component, and the images that poets create also sort of spark the imagination. And so can we capture some of those images that are in audience members? Well, we can do that in one person, an artist, right? A filmmaker. And what's her vision of what that poem, when she reads that poem, what is she seeing when she hears or reads the poem? And I thought that was an interesting experiment, and I thought this cross-pollination of the arts would be really generative and positive for the community. And it was a big event. There were a lot of people there, and it was a lot of fun, and so I was very happy to be a part of that. I first got to know Todd Boss when he picked my poem to animate. The poem is called Andrew Wyeth, Painter, Dies at 91, which is a poem that began with the New York Times obituary title. And I was a fan of Andrew Wyeth and had seen an exhibit out in Seattle, and I get at the time that was recent, and I was amazed by this picture in which the title of the painting, I don't recall the name of it, but it had cows in the title, but when you look at the picture, there are no cows. And so I was fascinated by this juxtaposition between this title that didn't have that had cows in it, but the poem or the painting itself didn't have cows in it, and that got me thinking. And so I wrote this poem, and it got published in The Believer, and then it got picked up by Best American Poetry, and that's where Todd Boss saw it, and he basically was commissioned to do. I think there were 12 or 13, or maybe 14 poems from that volume. And make those into films, and then he would find filmmakers and match them with the poems. And so the filmmakers had to find poems that they really, kind of connected with. So just to be selected was an amazing honor and truly one of the most exciting experiences of my life. So the poem is Andrew Wyeth, Painter Dies at 91, and I'll read that now. A weathered barn on a hilltop, a nude woman sprawled on the slope below. A giant squid rises out of a hayfield, and the barn is compassed in tentacles, then a cloud of ink. A man with a fountain pen in his hand and a pitchfork in his back walks the cow path around the barn and tells the beauty on the hill to step to it. It's as if her freckled skin is newly charcoaled, and the hayloft a smokescreen. The cows can't be heard for certain within the ink blot, but deer creep to the edge of the field on delicate feet. Now, none of Wyeth's paintings have squid in them, giant squid. And certainly there's no pitchfork that goes into the back of anybody. So this becomes this apocalyptic, weird dream of mine. But I don't know, it just felt right. I guess it felt kind of like a B movie. And it has, some elements of Wyeth's paintings in it. And then the filmmaker, sort of latched onto it because it is a kind of a visual poem, and he did some cool things with the squid and the cloud of ink and the ink coming from the fountain pen, and so he really sort of collided some of those images in a way that I think was very appropriate to the poem. And but he reversed the title, so he waited to read the title until the end of the poem, and that is poetic license. And is bold and audacious in it. It caught me off guard, but I have to say it was a good move on his part. And Tom Jacobson was the filmmaker, and I really do respect what he did with what I had. There was also this audio that, so I read the poem, but there was also this audio of these sighs that were kind of going throughout, and that kind of threw me off a little bit. But it added a texture and a layer, and I'm kind of glad he did it, even if it isn't something that I would do. Also, the sound of the ink from the fountain pen at the end dripping onto the paper. You sort of had these liquid drop sounds that he was able to recreate, and that was pretty cool too. So it was a real fun experience. And then my wife and I flew to Minneapolis on my dime, but we just wanted to see the festival, and that's where I got the idea for the Motion Poems Festival to bring it to Grand Rapids. But I went there, and they had the whole premiere, and not exactly a red carpet, but it was still just an amazing event. And I think what Todd Boss is doing in Minneapolis is amazing and a good model for those of us in Grand Rapids. And I took some inspiration from him. Poetry rarely has been a lucrative art. And I think the arts in general rely on patronage. And Grand Rapids has an incredible history of supporting the arts. The sculpture garden, the Frederick Meyer Sculpture Garden, is an amazing example of that. And I love, these kinds of things. Obviously, Art Prize has been another. Interesting thing about the Frederick Meyer Foundation, they also have done poetry events. So I've been able to see people like Jory Graham read her poems out there, and then there are other folks, who support, in other ways. So Aquinas has a series that's supported. I saw Seamus Heaney there. So I think the patronage allows us to see people that we wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And this is really important, this kind of cultural exchange where we're able to bring people in. And then I think the Dire Ives competition, which has been going on for so long and has such a rich heritage, is very much like this Pittsburgh Poetry Exchange that I was a part of in Pittsburgh, in that it's really seeding local talent. And it is really cultivating local talent. And it's asking people who are writing at home, privately, and maybe a little bit afraid to step publicly with their work. It's inviting them into the public to share. And we need that. We need that kind of sharing, and we need that kind of exchange. So I think having a competition and having winners and prizes and these kinds of encouragements go a long way. Poets can go very far and a very little bit of money. We're like camels in that regard, right? We don't need a lot, but once we get it, right, we can go a long, long time on it. So this is from a project that I've been doing. The project's called Saint with a Peacock Voice. And it's based, in fact, all the poems are written with the language of Flannery O'Connor, the short story writer. So each poem collects a subset of her words from a short story or a letter that she wrote, or an essay. And so I call language from that work, and then I confine myself to only using those words as they appear in the work, so I can't alter them for gender or number. I can't alter them in any way. And this was an incredible constraint, but also pretty exciting and liberating to find what you could do with someone else's vocabulary. I don't mean to just simply cannibalize Flannery O'Connor. I really mean to call attention to her and to write poems in her register, and that may or may not reflect what she was doing in her stories and poems and essays and etc. So I love this poem because you would never think you could get Grand Rapids from Flannery O'Connor's work, the Southern Georgia writer. But in fact, she had a short story that had Grand Rapids in it. It's just a throwaway city that was mentioned on a train, and I thought, well, this has to be written. So this is my little poem culled from one of O'Connor's stories. It's called Grand Rapids. City where snow surprised no one, where time turned white and everything changed. Snow became snowman, where snow hunted and killed forgotten cars, while trees mostly hardened. Where some stopped cold by snow, walked to the liquor store, and gave up housework. Where time, feeling jittery, hesitated. where white concealed kin, kin without houses, where the motionless said they lived for snow, then moved to Florida, where paper white became a sign of spring, and snow went on furlough, where moonlight ran wet on the road and fish climbed a ladder, where I made a home in time and felt time cheating, where snow hurt, where white hurt. And that even has a little political message in it. I think most poems, or many poems do, you can't divorce yourself from the political. Let's see if I have another poem here that I wanted to read. All right, so this one is a little bit more on the nose in terms of Flannery O'Connor's work. It's called Penitentiary. Good Jesus, I come to you from the green world, a dead man ashamed. You shouldn't trust me. I did the crime. I am a tornado with a dreamy voice. I pray, but you ought not to listen. You are nice people, white teeth, pure gold. You must have recognized my wrong before anything came out. I covered it up, but you said, I'm one of your own. If I could paint, I would paint you a hearse, a peanut butter automobile with bright blue parrots under a pine tree. Truth is, when I sing or tell a story, I see an undertaker. I guess I'm a disappointment. 3 times I laughed at the sunlight like I wouldn't be punished. Yes, you are a star. I know. I shouldn't stare. And this is a poem that came also from Flannery O'Connor's work, and I love the way this one came together. I don't know if you will. It's called Elvis Minor. Sometimes I feel, believable as I am, I'm only an amateur. Elvis in body, but not in mind. And not even body, since the artist known as Elvis is ever-changing, grotesque. For one to be seen, one has to be looked at. Perverse to ask if I'm really there. Does Elvis ask this? In a way, Elvis invented himself. At least his disciples say so. The fiction is Gothic, Southern through and through. I may know the South, but that doesn't make me Elvis or give me the gist of him. Kind of a shock to suffer as an artist. I thought I would devour the audience, live grandly, act slick. Yet I shift in and out of my body, advertising myself, diseased. Look at me, fading, poor in spirit, lest you believe America is true and or classless. Because I work at a Christian university, I thought it would, and because I've met a number of poets over the years at Calvin and other places who are poets of faith, of Christian faith. I thought it'd be worthwhile to get some of those poets together and have a symposium. That's kind of a grandiose word, but have them come together and talk about how their faith informs what they do as writers. I knew that was a good exercise for me. I had written a poetics that I felt captured what I believe about faith and how that has informed what I do. And I wanted to get other people into a conversation about that. And I wanted to hear what they had to say. And so I felt like if I could get them to come to Calvin, if I could get some money and raise some money and get, fly these people to Calvin and get them to write an essay, which was no small thing, in advance, then maybe we could have an opportunity to have a really substantive conversation. So that's what I did, and I was able to connect with George David Clark down at Washington and Jefferson College in Pennsylvania. And he used to be the editor of a little journal called 32 Poems. So I had met him over the years and really appreciated his perspective. So he and I became co-directors of this project. And then we brought 12 poets, people like Morris Manning, Jeffrey Nutter, some well-known poets, Lisa Russ Barr, and others that were not as well-known. And we had them all write essays. And they wrote these essays. They sent them to us, and we sent them back with comments and said, here, have you thought about this? We weren't trying to sort of do that in a heavy-handed way, but just trying to draw out more. And so then they brought their revised essays to this symposium, and we had this wonderful 2-day conversation. And then we also had a reading, and it was a private reading with no audience. We did it in the Center Art Gallery at Calvin, and it was one of the most memorable readings I've ever been a part of, where we read our poems, and it was a great connection. And I have hopes to publish that anthology. You can imagine that an anthology of essays by poets already is a tough sell, but then to sort of narrow it to Christian poets, that's also maybe a little bit demanding of a publisher, because probably not going to get a ton of sales, so it'd have to be a work of love. But I think it's worth having out there, and people said some really powerful things, fascinating things, and I personally think that kind of a symposium be very interesting in an interfaith way. So to get folks from the Muslim community and from the Hindu community and the Buddhist community and just all stripes, faith of all stripes. To come and do such a thing would be really fascinating. And maybe that's something that could happen in Grand Rapids. Certainly envision, when you stop being poet laureate, you don't stop having dreams of projects. So I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in doing a project, the poem as a graphic art, and doing an exhibition of poems that really look interesting on the page. So we'll see where that goes.